Thank you. As she said, my name is Blake Smith. I joined the school district in 2012 and just mainly supported the business applications in the school district. With my background, I was working for a Laserfiche reseller. So naturally, when I joined the district, they made me the Laserfiche administrator as well. So that was pretty convenient. To give you a little information, nope, there we go. So for the agenda, I'll give you a little bit of background information on the Idaho Falls School District, some of the Laserfiche products we use at the district, so you have an idea of everything that we're doing with Laserfiche, and then start talking about the business processes that we started implementing in Laserfiche forms and workflow, and what they looked like before, and then what we did with them after, and then I'll actually give you a demonstration of how we're using those. So a little bit about Idaho Falls School District 91. We're located in Idaho Falls, Idaho, go figure. We're the 7th largest school district in the state with approximately 10,200 students. And we have approximately 2,000 employees. That includes administrative staff, teachers, throughout the whole district. So, the Laserfiche products that we use for the process that I'll be talking about today, is Laserfiche itself, the main Laserfiche application, Laserfiche forms, Laserfiche Workflow, Laserfiche Mobile, and then we actually created a custom SQL database, Microsoft SQL database, and then we access a third-party application that houses our HR and finance information. That's hosted with a progress database that we integrated with. Everyone always likes to know license counts for some reason, so I put them on here. It's always a question that comes up with every customer story I've gone to. We currently have 34 named user licenses. Those named user licenses are mainly assigned out to the administrative staff inside of the district office. And then we have 94 forms participant licenses, which we had just purchased an additional 30 just the other week. So. The forms participant licenses are assigned out to mainly those out of the school, so principals, their secretaries, bookkeepers, assistant principals. And then there's some additional administrative staff that are assigned participant licenses as well, that don't necessarily need to be inside of Laserfiche. They just need access to forms. So, all right. So the process that I'll talk about today is our onboarding process for onboarding employees. So the onboarding process, there's a lot to it. It was probably one of the more difficult processes that we could have started with in the district. We very easily could have chosen something a little simpler, but it was the one that needed the attention, so we decided to go for it. So the onboarding process includes gathering employee information once they're hired. So I-9s, W-4s, they have to have their fingerprints that are sent to the state, verified. We have the policy packets, tech use agreement, and there's a lot of other stuff that just wouldn't fit on the slide. So it also includes supervisor approvals to make sure that, yes, the supervisor does actually want to hire this person. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cough, so bear with me. But they're also agreeing to what that employee is going to be paid, payroll information, network and email accounts for IT. And any of you that are in a school district know that there's tons of different systems out there that different grade levels use, different departments use. So we have anywhere over 50 systems that we have to set up users in depending on what that user's position is in the district. So we have to account for all of that as well. We also have a welcome letter that we would send out, welcoming them to the district, giving them links out to the district website for the policy manual, reminders of the tech use agreement. This is who you need to contact if you need keys to the building, that kind of stuff. And then we would scan the employees' forms into Laserfiche. So their resume, all the references that they had when they were applying for the position. And to do that, we have a creation of the employee folder. We have to apply the proper security. So since we have 30-something Laserfiche named licenses, we don't want just anyone accessing that information, so that's something we had to worry about. And then also naming conventions. We had some employees scanning stuff in that didn't name it, so it ended up in Laserfiche as untitled, which didn't help anyone at all. So we had a lot of things going on with the onboarding process that we needed to look at. So before Laserfiche, the icons might be a little hard to read, so I'll kind of walk through it with you. This is the process that we use. We use an application called AppleTrack, which is hosted by a third party. A lot of school districts, other organizations may use that. You guys may be familiar with it. But basically, it's a way for the school district to post a job opening. And in that job opening, they can go through and post the requirements for it. And at any time, anyone that's interested in a job opening with the district can create an account in AppleTrack for free. They can then view the job openings. They can subscribe to certain kinds of positions. So they can then get emails when one of those positions opens. And then they can actually apply for the job. And right in that system, it's all paperless already. So they're already giving us their name, their address, phone numbers, email addresses, electronically to begin with. So that was pretty nice to start out with, but then what happened was everything from that point on, after the supervisor decided that's the person I'm gonna hire, was on paper. So the supervisor decides to hire the employee, that's the second step there, and then HR was notified by phone or email or in person saying this is the person we want to hire. And so then we had an Excel spreadsheet. I'm sure most of you have those floating around, almost every department, which basically was set up to enter the employee's name, and then we had columns for the different systems that they needed to be added to. Which didn't include every system. It was just the main things that needed to happen. And so then as those were done, they were checked off by someone in the department that was responsible for that step. It causes some issues because some things need to be done before others. And with the spreadsheet, it was just added to the spreadsheet, and then anyone could do whatever they wanted after that. There was no regulation of what order things were done in. So we discovered that was an issue as well. After that, so the different departments process the employee. HR would send out what we call PAFs, their personnel action forms, which included all the information for that employee as far as what was their position, how much were they going to get paid, what was the grade scale they were going to be on, the GL code associated with that, and then the sign-offs of all the supervisors. So that was all on paper. That PAF would then be scanned into Laserfiche. I don't have this on here, but when it was scanned into Laserfiche, we basically had one folder that all personnel files were added to for an employee. So we had a document for every employee in the same folder. And some of those documents were 80 pages. Some of them were 5 pages. Depends how long they had been in the district. So that posed another problem trying to sort through everything that was in there. After the employee is hired, for certain employees, we also needed 90-day reviews. And so what would happen is HR would go through and discover, okay, well, who's been here 90 days since their hire date, and now we got to go tell their supervisor that they need a 90-day review on that employee. And then that was done on paper and then sent in. So, excuse me. So there's a lot of stuff being done manually that didn't need to be. Things were being entered multiple times into different systems on different pieces of paper. Where at the beginning in AppleTrack, most of it we had already collected, but we were asking for it multiple times. So that became an issue that we decided needed to be addressed. These are the forms that we used. So the one on the left is the personnel action form. It was a fillable PDF, so that was actually kind of nice because you could read it. And people could just type into it, but then even after that, they had to print it off to get the signatures. So we kind of got there, and then it just kind of dropped off. So, and then the one on the right is for the classified personnel for their 90-day reviews. And once again, on that one, we had not only to get the supervisor's signature, but we also have to get the employee's signature on both of those forms. So. So after redoing everything in Laserfiche, just to give you an idea of what we now use, we use 3 different Laserfiche forms for this one process, and we use 9 Laserfiche workflows in the back end to process it all. We also connect into our HR and finance database using Workflow, which is, as I said before, is a progress database, a progress SQL database. And then we just created, I don't even know if you can call it a custom SQL database, because it's really just a database with a table in it to hold the info. So it's very simple. It was created just by doing an import from an Excel spreadsheet to create all the columns. So that tells you how easy it was to go through and create that. So after we implemented Laserfiche, this is now the new process that we have. So to begin with, this is what we call our new hire form. And it just has 2 fields in it, very simple. So the first one is the applicant ID. And any of you familiar with AppleTrack, every person that applies for a job gets an applicant ID number. And so as the supervisor is looking at the applicant in AppleTrack, that ID number is just there, and it's really easy to get to. So the supervisor decides that that's the applicant they want to hire. They take that ID number and just enter it into the first field. The second field is for the email address. And we auto-populate it in forms based on who's logged into forms, so it's already there. But we had some people, and I'm sure a lot of you deal with this too, where the supervisor doesn't want to do the paperwork. They want the assistant or the secretary to do the paperwork. So we allow them to actually change that email address if they want. And what happens is on the next step, an email is sent to that email address with a link to complete the new path. So if they don't, since they have to do the hiring though, they choose the applicant, and then they can put their secretary's email address in there, and then the secretary can pick it up from there to complete the paperwork. On the right-hand side is the workflow that we do. So in workflow, after that's submitted, we're doing a number of things. We're retrieving the applicant ID and the email address. We then actually go up into AppleTrack using their API with workflow. We do a search for that applicant number, and it returns all the results of that applicant. So we're able to grab the phone number, the name, the address, the email address, even if it's a personal email address. We grab all that information, and we can then use that in additional workflows. So that became very beneficial. So the second and third step there, we're retrieving it, and then we're parsing it out with an XML activity and workflow, for those of you familiar with that. And then we're just simply inserting that data into the custom SQL database that we made. After that, we email the submitter. So it could have been the supervisor or the secretary, but we take that email address and then we email that person with a link saying, okay, now you can go fill out the personnel action form for this user. And then the last step on there is our HR assistant is the one that usually starts the processing of the paths, and she wanted to be notified when one was started. So we also email her so she has a heads up that something is coming down the line if she doesn't see something she needs to check on it. So this is the path. Kind of hard to see. I had to zoom it out in order to make it fit. So, and I'll do a live demonstration of these as well. So, but basically on the path, the email that's sent out includes a query string. So a little addition to the URL of the link that includes the applicant ID number. The applicant ID number is right here. So that number gets filled in because of the query string, and then it does a database lookup in our custom database to fill out all the rest of this information right here. So we've now taken away, 6 or 7 fields that the end user has to fill out, so it saves on time because all that information was already gathered. Up at the top, you'll notice we have a section, and I'm sure my supervisor loves this if she's in here. I haven't seen her though, so. Is my supervisor's name. So since we're also connected to our HR software includes the supervisor for every employee. So we're also grabbing who the supervisor is for the person filling the form out. Because after it's submitted, it needs to go to a supervisor for approval. And I'll show you a little bit of that as well. But down here, you can see we can then add the position or the assignment for the employee. At the school district, I think our list is over 400 that we have in that drop down. So it gets a little complex. So we wanted to make sure on the paper forms, people could just write whatever they wanted. And so then when it got to HR and Payroll, it was a matter of them deciphering what that actually meant for how it fit into the HR software. So that always kind of got jumbled up, and now we've taken the values from the HR software to populate the drop-down list. So they can't choose anything that doesn't match what's already in there. So that's really convenient as well. They have struggled a little bit. It hasn't been an easy transition with that, because most of them have just said, oh, it's this type of teacher or something, when really that teacher's title is something completely different. So some of them have had to learn a little bit different of what the actual titles and assignments are for the different positions in their schools, but it's gone over pretty well. They can then put in the amount of hours in the GL code. Those fields aren't required, so if they don't know them, it's okay. They can leave those blank. Usually payroll or HR will fill that in for them. And you can see here that there's a link. Well, you may not be able to see it, it's kind of blurry. There's a link here so they can add multiple assignments and positions as well. So we do have some employees that do work at multiple schools. So they may be like a Title I tutor at one school during the AM, and then a Title I tutor at another school during the PM or something. And so they actually have multiple assignments. So we needed to accommodate for that as well. Then for the new hire, they can decide if they're full-time, part-time, if they're a stipend, and then if they're replacing someone. This comes in handy because a lot of our systems that we end up setting people up in, if we know who they're replacing, we can just go find the person in that system and then give them the same permissions, and it cuts down on a lot of time. So for instance, even in Active Directory, for those of you that use groups or distribution lists, if we can find that user, we can then see what distribution lists and groups they're assigned to, and then just mimic that with the new employee. So it makes it a lot simpler to have that name there. Excuse me. The next field is the effective date. So this is their start date. We do a lot with that start date that you'll see later on. So that's a very important date. You'll notice it has an asterisk next to it, so it's required. And then we also allow the supervisor to make any remarks, so any comments that HR or payroll needs to know about. Sometimes the hours that they put up here are kind of weird, so just putting a number in there doesn't always match up with what payroll needs to know, so we allow them to put the remarks in there, so as it goes down the workflow, those people know what's going on. This is the new hire process. So some of the things, as we started working through building this process, we started realizing that it's not just getting the approvals to hire the employee. There's a lot more going on that needs to happen. So network accounts need to be created. Phones need to be set up with extension numbers. If they're a user that needs access, security access in our HR software, that needs to be set up. There's directors that want to be notified when certain types of employees have been hired and come on board. There's a whole list of things that happen, and this is just the beginning. There's already ideas floating around to add more to it. So down on the bottom, find my mouse here, there we go. So right here is where we start. This is the initial submission. Because we pull in that supervisor information, we then look to see, well, did a supervisor submit this or not? Because if a supervisor submitted it, they don't want to see it again, because they've already approved it, obviously. They're the ones that entered it. So with that, from that database, we look to see what position they are. And if they match a certain position or an assignment, we then tell Laserfiche Forms to bypass the step. We tell it to go down this route rather than up to the supervisor approval. If the supervisor does need to approve it, so like I said, the secretary is usually the one filling out the paperwork. Obviously, they're not a supervisor, so it goes up to the supervisor approval, and they can approve or deny that. One of the nice things about Laserfiche Forms and Workflow is that you can send email notifications off. So if the supervisor denies it, we notify the person that submitted the form that it was denied. And so they know that something was wrong. The supervisor can make comments to give them detailed information of why it was denied. And then they can do what they need to either start a new one or move on. So maybe the supervisor talked to the employee afterwards and they decided to go with a different job somewhere else. And so now they can just deny that and go from there. The next step on that one is the, I know that's really hard to read. It's the HR assistant for gathering paperwork. So after the employee has decided, yeah, we're going to hire them, they need to come in with HR and they need to fill out their I-9. They need to fill out their the paperwork for fingerprinting to be submitted to the state. They need to do use agreements. All that kind of stuff has to happen. So they're able to do that. Payroll then gets it. They enter the initial information in our HR and payroll system, and then the HR assistant gets it one more time to complete the path that was started to begin with. So all those steps right there we found became really important, that those had to be done first. So some of the things that we found as we were doing the discovery on this was, as I kind of mentioned it before, was the name was being entered onto a spreadsheet, and then anyone could do whatever they wanted after that. So user accounts were being created in other systems. They were being given access to our network and our network resources. They were given access to an email account. And if you think about that from an IT perspective, they're not even hired yet because their paperwork hasn't been completed. So now that we've given them access to our network, they haven't even agreed to anything. So it caused a lot of issues. Luckily, I haven't heard of anything that's ever happened because of that, but it's not good practice. So with forms now, we can make sure that HR and payroll finish off the paperwork before any of the accounts are ever created. So this next step here is a parallel process. So we actually go through now a PAF approval process on the bottom. We go up into AppleTrack. We have a person that goes into AppleTrack and downloads the resume and everything, their application, and then scans that into Laserfiche, and that gets filed away. And then the top one with the arrow that comes up here is our new hire process. So this is where the accounts are actually being created now. So this is another important thing is we do our user accounts, we call it a 4x4. So it's the last four of the last name and the first four of the last name and the first four of the first name. And that's their username for the network. Well, if that's already taken, we add a number on the end of it. So a lot of people were going into these other systems, creating accounts based on what they assumed that person's email address was. And it wasn't always the case. So once again, the first step is now that they create the network and the email address account, and then all of that gets passed on through the steps of what that person's email address actually is. So now as the other accounts are being set up, they're being set up correctly the first time, hopefully. But as I said, we notify IT, we notify phone systems, we notify directors, we notify accounting if they need certain GL codes, if they need access to certain GL codes and stuff like that, different PO groups. All of that is done through that process. So, and after all three of those finish, it comes back together. We then save it into Laserfiche using the Save to Repository feature in Forms. And then we look to see what kind of employee it was to then take that employee's information and enter it into a 90-day review database as well. Got a question in the back?
Yeah, Blake, you went into details about the email, and that's an issue we have as well. Do you do anything to accommodate, let's say you hire Rebecca Smith, but she goes by Becky?
Currently, it's what's in the HR software. So in our HR software, it has to be the legal name. Because of state reporting. And so currently that's what we use to do that. Email address, IT can change that at the request. We've started cleaning up a lot of those though, because IT wanted to be more consistent with what everything else had as their name. So in certain situations, they have changed it to accommodate for what they want to go by, their alias, I guess you could say. So it just depends on the situation. They've determined to accommodate that or not. So after we enter that into the 90-day review, we then have some other workflows that will kick off to do reminders and things. This is the new hire form that is used. So in Laserfiche Forms, you can create multiple forms for the same process, which is really nice. So if you guys probably don't remember, but I've looked at the form enough, I memorized it. On our old paper form, our PDF, we included every field that ever had to be looked at by anyone during the process. So the fields that determine what the pay grade is for the employee is on the same form that's first started, which caused confusion for our supervisors that were starting the form, because some of them would think, well, do I need to determine that? And so they would write in there. And it could become a problem down the road after things are signed, and now you would need to actually change that because payroll said no. It's actually this grade level that they need to start on, despite what you think as a supervisor. So in forms, you can hide the fields that you don't want anyone to see. So that becomes really useful as well. So this is actually the form that HR sees. So it's a little bit different. We don't include the supervisor information up at the top because HR doesn't need to know that. It's already been to the supervisor at that point. So you can see that area doesn't exist up there. We still include, the name, their address, location, and then we have the position information. But then you'll notice we also have the pay information now, because that's what HR and Payroll are really concerned about. So we can show that to them without showing it to the supervisor or the secretary that started the form. So that really had some good benefits. Some other things that we did is on here we now have an employee signature field. So those of you using Forms 9.2, it's one of the best features ever created. You can do it on an iPad, you can do it on a phone, you can do it on a computer with a mouse or a touchpad. But you simply click on sign, and then they are able to either type the name in, or there's a draw ability where they can actually write their signature like on a keypad at Walmart or something when you're paying with a credit card. So now we can actually capture the employee's signature digitally, or electronically, I should say. Have that available, and then the last few fields there we use to actually do some of our routing. So those, depending on what's answered in those last three fields, depends on some of the routes that happen through the workflow process. So we make sure we're assigning it to the right person. And once again, this isn't something that the supervisor should do. This is something that HR or payroll need to decide. And so we show it to them to make that decision. So I mentioned that we store the personnel action form, and a workflow actually does that. So we take the path, we store it into what we call a process folder in Laserfiche, and it has gone through basically and assigned the metadata for that employee, mainly the social security number, and then we've also set a document type. We have a document type field that's a drop-down menu that includes, I think we have over 50 document types listed in there. And so workflow can look at that to file it away. So in this workflow, we actually grab that document, we grab the metadata from it, we do a database lookup into our HR software, because from the beginning of this process and what's entered into our HR software, it could change. It kind of goes back to the name question. In the HR software, it's the legal name, and so we want to make sure that everything is matched up with what's in there with that name. So we query that, we bring it back, we check to see if the employee got an email address. In our district, not every employee gets one currently. So if they don't have an email address, we don't want to try sending them an email and then crash the workflow because it will terminate. So we check to see if that's there. If so, we email the employee a copy of their path, so that way they have it for their own records. We then go through and find out if the employee already has a folder in our Laserfiche system. If they do, then we go down to the next step and we take the path and assign it into their appropriate folder. If they don't, we actually invoke a workflow. So those of you that took the advanced workflow class yesterday learned about invoking workflows, passing parameters. That's what the workflow on the right-hand side does. So it's a standalone workflow, and the wonderful part about it is we can create an employee's folder structure based off their name. We can set the metadata on the folders, and then we can make sure all the subfolders are created as well and apply security. And it's all done the same way every time. So there's no more of the person at the front desk or someone in HR saying, oh, we need to create a folder or something for this employee, going in and then just adding the folders that are needed or not assigning the metadata correctly. So it's all done the same way, the same time, every time. So that made it really convenient, a lot less stress for me as a Laserfiche admin to know that things are being consistent in the repository. So once all that's done, once again, it then goes down and then moves the path into the employee's folder. So this is the 90-day review database, or the workflows for the 90-day review. We do have a couple of them. So the one on the left is at the end of the hiring process. I mentioned we take the data of the employee and insert it into a database. So it's just a two-step process. We retrieve the values, we enter it in, which basically includes their name, their position, their location, and their start date. And then there's an additional column in there for whether or not they've completed the 90-day review. So we then have the next two workflows. We've actually combined these now. I got tired of doing two different workflows, keeping them up. So we've combined these. They now do pretty much the same thing. Since we know that it's 90 days out from their start date that they need to have that done by, we go through and look in that 90-day review database. We take the start, we first look to see if anyone's completed one. If they have, we don't get them from the results. We leave them alone. And then we grab their start date. With Workflow, we use the calculator, the token calculator, to then calculate out so many days. So the first one we calculate out 76 days from the start date and send a reminder to the supervisor of that employee saying, hey, in this many days, in 2 weeks, you're gonna have a 90-day review that's coming up for this employee. This was their start date. And so they know right away that something is coming. The next one is 87 days, so 3 days before their 90-day review needs to be completed, we send them another one. That one actually includes a link to the 90-day review form that they can click on. It again includes a query string with the employee's name, so it fills out the employee's name on the form, and then it does a database lookup and fills out most of the other parts of the form as well. And then the last one is the 91 days or more. This one runs, it runs every day. So the workflow itself runs every day, but this one will send a reminder for every time it checks and a 90-day review is not completed after 91 days or more. So it's constantly sending out emails to the supervisor saying, get it done. We need it. And HR loves it because it was their idea. So, because before what would happen, if you remember, is those emails were manually going out. They were having to hunt down supervisors and employees and try to figure out, okay, who had one, who doesn't. Workflow and the database now take care of it all. And once again, it's just real simple. It's just a calculator token that just goes through and does it all for us. We don't have to do anything. It's all automated. So, and it just reiterates through every single one of those until it's done. And then the next morning, at 5 a.m. it runs it again. So as long as they've got it done, they have no worries, but if they don't, they'll keep getting the reminders. So so I'll just do a short demonstration on that so you guys can actually see it live. Because it's nice to see screenshots, but it's not what everyone likes to see. See if I can log into my email to get an ID number here real quick. Okay, so this is the new employee hire form. So once again, this is the one they start off with. This is where the supervisor says, I want to hire that person. I need to put in the applicant ID and the email address for notification. So in this case, that's the applicant number. You can also see that it's a required field, so it tells the user to fill the field out. So that's kind of nice. Once you put it in, it goes away.
I got a question.
Uh-huh.
So in your real environment, this applicant ID is actually coming from AppleTrack, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the question was, in the real environment, is the applicant ID actually coming from AppleTrack? And it is. So every applicant in AppleTrack has an ID number automatically assigned to them. So once we have that, we just hit submit.
That submitter's email address, did you say that defaulted in based off of the OS logged in?
That defaulted it in based on who was logged into Laserfiche Forms. So for anyone, we do have the public portal for forms,
Right.
but for this, we only allow authorized users to submit. So you can't even get to it unless you're logged in.
As a participant.
As a participant license user, yep. And the internet's a little slow here, so hopefully this will kick through here. There we go. So after we submit it, you have a nice thank you page. One thing that we found is users, especially with a new process, were unsure of what happens next. They didn't know. So we wanted to give them an idea of what's gonna happen after they've done that process. So here we just say, what's next? We let them know an email is going to be sent to them with a link that they need to click on to then finish the path process. And that they should get it within the next couple of minutes.
Is this in Forms or Workflow?
That is Forms. Yep, that's built into Forms. So you can see here, I just got my email. So this is what the supervisor sees. And so now they just have to click on this link. It will take them right out to the form for the path. And you can see, so the supervisor filled in, the applicant ID number is there. They can't change it, so we made that read only. We don't want them changing to any applicant number. The name didn't come across, and that's because this user isn't technically in our HR system, because it's a test user in AppleTrack. But you can see it did pull in some other information for us. And now I can go through and say, this is what they're going to be doing. You give them a GL code. And I know that's not a real GL code, it's okay. Replacement for the effective date, you get the calendar drop downs. And then you can go through and you can submit it, or they can save it as a draft as well, and that's really nice too with Forms 9.2. So, excuse me. So if they save it as a draft, it goes into their draft folder, and then that supervisor can go back to it at any time. We have another path for existing employees that we use, and that one actually requires an employee's signature before it can be submitted, unlike this one. And so saving it as a draft is really important in that case, because they're usually getting a teacher's signature out of the school, and that teacher is teaching all day, or at least should be. So it's a little difficult for them just to say, oh, I need the signature of that teacher, then just go barge into their classroom and interrupt their environment. So with them being able to save a draft, they can come back to it at any time they need to. So they can say, hey, when you have a minute, come down to the office and sign this. Or they can walk around on their iPad and go to them and say, hey, can you sign this real quick? They take their finger, sign it, and they're ready to go. So, so after that, they can, excuse me, they can either save it or they can submit it, and then that's where that whole process starts with the path of going to the HR assistant or the supervisor for approval, and then payroll, HR again, and then through the network setup information. So,
So if they do save as a draft, does it prompt you how where you saving it? What's the file name you want to save as?
it doesn't prompt you; it saves it automatically in Forms.
So how do they get that? Go back and look for it? Where do you save it?
So when you're in Forms, you have an inbox. And since the monitor is a little smaller, it'll show it a little bit differently depending on what you have. So in your inbox, you can go to pending tasks. You can see the history, which is the history of anything that you've acted on or submitted. And then you can also see your drafts. In the drafts, the one thing that we've put in a feature request for is it does just save it with the name of the form. It doesn't tell you any other information. So we do have some supervisors, and those of you that have gone to 9.2 from 9.1 had the same issue with emails. Since it's just generic, it tells you what form it is, you don't know who it belongs to. So we've had some supervisors raise concerns about that. So I do have a feature request in for that. I hope it gets in. But from here, you can just simply click on the form, and then you can go finish it and submit it. So, and then it will disappear from your draft list. So, was there a question in the back?
What do you do when you have employees with name changes? So maintaining the files.
We're working on that one. So, and I'm not lying, we are working on it, I promise. We have a form for that. It's kind of like the old answer, there's an app for that, right? So we have an employee name change form that we will be implementing. and it will go through and gather the information about that employee. So what their current name is and then what their new name will be. To do that, our payroll department requires the social security card with the new name, so they can upload that through forms. So once they have that, they submit it, it will then go to payroll. Payroll will then process that accordingly, and then on the back end, once that's done, we'll have a process that will then iterate through, find the old employee's folder, and rename it and all of the documents that belong to the employee to now reference the new name. So.
Do you have a way to track what their old name was in case people don't?
With a multi-value field, so in Laserfiche for your metadata field, you can just have a text field and mark it as multi-value, and now you can have, if they change their name 10 times, you can track all 10 versions of their name, I guess you could say. So. Let's see. Find my mouse here. There we go. You can see we have a lot of other forms as well. So one of them that belongs to this process is the 90-day review. So this is the 90-day review form. I didn't walk through the whole process because it would take a while for approvals to go through, especially for a fake employee. But so what would happen is I would get an email like the one I got earlier. Click on the link, and then it would fill in that employee's information to begin with. The supervisor would then go through and get their signature. So here's the signature. Since I'm a Laserfiche Forms user, I can save my signature in Forms, for those of you that didn't know that, and it will default my signature on there. But this is what they would usually see. So you can type it in, and you can choose a style if you want to. You want to go a little gothic or something. Or you can draw it. I've gotten pretty good on a mouse. Touchpad, I'm still a little interesting on. The nice part is when you have a touch device, though, because you can actually use your finger to do the signature. So that makes it really simple. Huh?
So all your supervisors, anybody that's doing the 90-day review, do they have the forms authenticated user licenses then?
Correct, yeah. So, and I mean, they can have named user licenses if they want to, but at a school district, for any of you at districts, I mean, I know other organizations have the issue too, but the funding, we couldn't afford to buy everyone a full named user at this point, especially when this is really all they were going to be doing. So for now, that's why we have so many participant licenses, is to accommodate the needs of those supervisors. Eventually, we plan on upgrading those licenses to named user licenses and allowing the schools access to the Laserfiche repository. So as we start getting more into student records, we would allow them to access the students in their schools information inside of Laserfiche. So.
Did you say you had a forms portal though?
Yes. So the forms portal, it's not really used in this process. We actually just implemented our main use for it with special education. So for special education, we have to have physician referrals for those with different IEPs. And one of the questions, there's a couple things that came up. One of them was FERPA. So you can't just have information about students out there on the internet for anyone to see. So that took away our ability at first to do database lookups into PowerSchool, where all that information resides. Because we can't just put a link on the website and then just allow anyone to click on it and populate student information. So what we did is we actually created an intranet. This is actually on one of the slides, but we'll go over it now. And the intranet integrates with our Active Directory. So any employee of the district that has a user account can authenticate to the intranet. We know they are who they, well, as long as they're not using someone else's login, right? Who they are on the intranet, and then we embed the Laserfiche form into the intranet page and pass the email address that's associated with that user to forms. and that's how we know that that is the person filling out the form. The other side of that is we've now put it behind an authentication mechanism, and so now we could enable the database lookups again for that. So. Let's see. There we go. Roadblocks along the way. I love the comic. So a lot of the people were afraid of change. That was probably one of the #1 things we ran into, was that people didn't want to get away from their spreadsheet. They didn't want to have to change the process that they've been doing for years to accommodate the new electronic process. So as it says change, well, I now know what I'm up against, and everyone's kind of going at the computer freaking out. We had a lot of users that were actually really open to it, but there were definitely a few that kind of held their ground for a little while and kind of said, well, I'll do it if I have to. And it just happens in every organization. So some of the things we did to kind of help out with that is we taught them how to use the system. Excuse me. So you can't just create the system and say, okay, this is what you're going to do, now do it. You need to explain more things to them. So one of the big questions was, well, what about my spreadsheet? What do I do? I don't have my spreadsheet. How am I supposed to track what's going on with that person? So in Forms, you have a manage ability. You can pull reports on different submissions. So we went in and gave them access to that. They could now go in, look up an employee, and see exactly where that employee's path is at in the process. The supervisors, I don't know so much. I think they usually submit stuff and kind of forget about it. They leave it up to the secretaries and the assistants. But the secretaries and the assistants love it, that have started getting into it more, because the other thing that you get with Forms is the ability to track where it's at any point in time. So with the paper process, it would be filled out. The principal would give it to the secretary or put it in what we call the turtle, which is the manila envelope, and it would be catered throughout the district until it got to where it needed to go. But no one knew where it was. I went into a couple principals' offices, and I could see why they didn't know where they were, because their desks are just filled with paper. I mean, they're working on mainly things for students, right? I mean, that's the main reason for a school, is to accommodate the needs of the students. So losing the paperwork and stuff for an employee is kind of like, well, we'll get to that later. But from an IT perspective and HR perspective, it's important because, well, we do state reporting, and we get paid based on how many employees and how many students, and so having all that paperwork together was really important for us. So walking through with them, having patience was a huge thing for us to make sure that we could make them as comfortable as they were going to decide to be, because you can't force them into loving it, but we tried everything we could. So one of the ways we got started was figuring out what the business processes were. We held meetings. Luckily, our HR and finance director does both HR and finance, so we were kind of able to pull everyone together in a meeting. And we held a meeting, was it about every week? Every week for a couple months. And we would just go through. We first started with our HR and finance director, Carrie, over here, basically saying, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to take the department and these processes. And now I want each of you to choose one process in your department, because we had HR, payroll, and accounting, and take one process and map it out. What happens with the process? And we had a lot of discoveries during that point. So we found out a lot of them didn't really know how it started. They knew it was put down on paper, but they didn't know how it actually began until it got to them. And then once they got it, they obviously knew what they did with it, but they didn't know what happened up until that point a lot of the times. So we did a lot of discovery by contacting. We had 3 test schools for a lot of our stuff, so we would talk with the principals and the secretaries of the test schools to find out how they actually did things. Because what we thought a lot of the time they were doing, they had a different mindset of what was actually going on. So by having those 3 test schools, it helped out a lot, making sure we were on the same page for the most part. Obviously, there were still some things we didn't catch on to or that they hadn't mentioned in our meetings when we were doing that. But by having the departments actually map the processes out, for me as an admin, it was nice because I didn't have to do all the discovery myself, but we also got them involved. So they were able to take some ownership of what the end result was, so that made it a little easier. Because there were multiple times where someone would say, well, it needed to go here. And I'd pull up their little sheet and say, well, it's not here. I didn't know it needed to go there, so we would just go ahead and add it after that. But, and then the last question was, how do we make sure employees are who they say they are when filling out the form? I kind of already talked about that with the Active Directory intranet integration, so that resolved a lot of issues. Another thing with that is we're now going to be able to use that name change request, phone number and address request, because you don't want anyone just going in and saying, I'm going to change Blake's name today. I like Smith, though. Smith is a good last name. So now that we can make sure that they are who they say they are, we can verify all that information. So that's pretty much the demonstration. If there's any additional questions.
How long did it take?
So I was able to get Carrie to come with me last year to the conference. And the day the conference started, she had a whole sheet of things for me to work on. But we started probably within a month after we got back by holding the meetings with the departments. The main part, I would say, we had ready by August.
Of the one that he showed today.
Of the one that I showed today, yeah.
We had some simpler ones that we actually probably had in place within a couple of months after we left, after they'd gone through the testing and everything.
Yeah, so we had some smaller processes that we had worked on that were they were easier. And so we were able to get those live. The one that I just showed today, we had ready by August for the most part. Obviously, we've gone through and refined things as we found little niches. For instance, an employee can have multiple supervisors based on what positions they have. So if they have 2 positions and they're at 2 different schools, their supervisor is per position. And so we had to try to accommodate for that when we're pulling their supervisor on the path. Well, which supervisor do we select? So we had to build in using JavaScript. Well, if there's multiple supervisors, show a drop-down field so they can select which one. But altogether, it was January to August really is about how long it took. So.
Are you willing to share your email address?
Yes, definitely. I'm ready.
Yeah, I also want to share that we have an online answers group for K-12. And Blake is a very active member and contributor to the answers discussion. So you can also find him there. And if you want to participate and contribute to the K-12 discussion, I encourage you to sign up as a member. And yesterday we have seen quite a few members signed up. So fantastic. Well, we are up to the hour, and feel free to stick around and ask more questions to Blake. But now let's give Blake another round of applause for a fantastic job well done.